Hey everyone, welcome back. Day 2 of Champs is upon us, and in this video, I'm going to give you my predictions for the 4 matchups of Day 2, as well as doing just a quick run through of what happened on Day 1, so that we are set up for those predictions for Day 2. So, a couple of upsets during Day 1. Let's go ahead, let's talk through those. To start off with, let's go ahead, and as we look at the bracket, we actually started here in winner's bracket round 1 with Dallas versus Minnesota. I really thought Minnesota, coming off of what they did in the Stage 5 Major and what could be potentially the most impressive run that we've seen throughout the entirety of this year, they just weren't able to carry that over into the first matchup against Dallas. So these stats are all from breakingpoint.gg. Definitely go check it out if you're looking for these KD marks and the scores and how players performed in each and every single mode. But Dallas, it was a quick 3-0. And as you look across the board, the biggest thing overall statistically that stands out for me is Major Maniac and Prisa. They both put up a .69, and those two had a ton to do with Minnesota's success at the Stage 5 Major. If they want to play well and eventually make a run through losers, they definitely have to have more of an impact. And if you look at the scores overall, a 250 to 147 hard point really wasn't close at all. S&D 6-1, Control 3-1. I mean, this was pretty much one-sided in and out, and Minnesota didn't just show up, at least in this first matchup. So Match 1, Dallas gets a 3-0 win over Minnesota. As we move on to this Optic versus NYSL matchup, you look at statistics overall, and they're going to point to one glaring issue when it comes to Optic Chicago. If you look across the board, they all basically played pretty well. Envoy didn't, but he is that entry. He is that route man. So sometimes you're putting yourselves in precarious situations that you're probably not going to win those gun battles. But overall, Scump had a really good day. And when you look across the board at the KD numbers, you might say, well, 3 people were positive from Optic. What really happened? The answer to that is in S&D. They just weren't able to get it done in Search and Destroy, making a ton of mistakes. If you think about that map 5 raid S&D, there were multiple rounds, like the one where Scump did have the artillery strike. They used their artillery strike. They weren't able to get them off the bomb. I believe it was a scene that defused. Wasn't able to get him off the bomb before they were able to defuse, despite having numbers and the artillery strike. I mean, that is just an absolute blunder of a round. There was one round where Hydra on defense pushed up into weights. They had him dead to rights, and they let him escape when they could have converged on him and traded that kill. There are just really simple things for Optic that's not going their way, and they have to make those changes if they want to make a run throughout this tournament. But overall, you look at the respawns, such as that map 4 hardpoint, 250 to 96. So they're getting it done in the respawns for the most part. They just have to be better at S&D. So NYSL moves on with that other round 1 winners matchup. As we hop down to losers bracket, LA Thieves versus Minnesota. Minnesota did come back, at least bounce back a little bit. If you look at the overall series stats here, John, I mean, you just can't have one of your SMGs in Champs drop a .58, right? Everybody else, / your Kenny, they absolutely showed up, played really well. But when you're losing the majority of those hill gun battles against other SMGs like the Standy and Attach, if you're John, you can't go 59 and 101 throughout the entirety of a series and expect to win. So if they had just a little bit more help, that probably would have ended up going towards LA Thieves. But you look across the board here, they were able to win the map 1 hardpoint before losing map 2, losing map 3. They did make a comeback in the map 4 Garrison hardpoint before ultimately, if you're playing a Miami S&D against Rocker, that is by far their best S&D map, so it's probably not going to go your way. Minnesota goes and wins this to advance, and the last matchup of the day was Optic Chicago versus Florida. Unfortunate for Florida. They were one of those teams that looked dangerous throughout the entirety of the year, but didn't really do much throughout the entirety of the year, right? They weren't ever in a grand finals. They really didn't make too many runs throughout majors. They were dangerous. They just weren't quite able to make a run when it counted most. And in this one, again, Scump played really well. Formal and Dashy were super consistent. Envoy, -5. Throughout 4 maps, -5. I mean, it is what it is. But overall, this was pretty convincing outside of the S&D, the map 2 S&D on standoff, they got absolutely obliterated again. Envoy went 3-8, trying to be super aggressive and push on flanks. It just doesn't work out. Formal went 5-7, which is okay, but overall, the S&D, they just continue to get mopped on. So if they want to play well and make a run throughout champs, Optic just has to answer the call when it comes to S&D, which brings us to the matchups today. So we have 4 matchups today. The first one is Dallas versus Toronto at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. After that will be New York versus Atlanta FaZe. So these are the 2 winners semi matchups. Losers of these will drop down into the losers bracket to play first against Optic and then against Minnesota. So as we go ahead, and now it's time to make our predictions. So as we take a peek at this, we have Atlanta versus NYSL. I'm just going to start at the top here and make my predictions throughout. The last time we saw the Atlanta FaZe, they got absolutely obliterated in their first matchup by the Minnesota Rocker in the Stage 5 Major, and then they dropped down to losers bracket and they got eliminated by the Seattle Surge, in which Pristini and Nikki D, or Classic, absolutely popped off. They made a massive run in that map 5 S&D on standoff. So it's interesting what to expect from Atlanta throughout this champs run, right? We haven't seen them since those previous 2 losses. Scrims, by all accounts, have been going better for them. I mean, they're the most dangerous team in the CDL. They're the most successful. They had by far and away the best win-loss record for this year as a whole. But how are they playing right now? And oh, by the way, this is on LAN and it is in front of a crowd again. So what will we get out of Atlanta? And then, of course, when it comes to NYSL, Clay is back. And you saw him, especially throughout that map 5 S&D against Optic. Clay was the one who was making those calls, right? Between every single round when they would make the scene switch and they would show the NYSL players having deliberations, talking about what's going next, it was always Clayster that was making the calls and telling his team what to try to execute. And that's what NYSL was missing with DiamondCon in the roster. Not that he's not skilled, not that DiamondCon can't play, but Clayster is that guy that pulls forward and goes ahead and makes those calls. So as we go ahead and look at this, when it comes to Atlanta versus NYSL, I don't know why. I just feel like Atlanta is going to bounce back, especially with the way that Abizi and Celium and Simp have all basically produced since they've been on the scene. You have Arcides there, which should be able to match up well against Clayster. It's just from top to bottom, this Atlanta FaZe roster is a bit more dangerous, and I just expect them to come out and get a victory here. So in this map 1, I'm going to take Atlanta, and I'm going to move them into our winners final, which brings us to the first matchup of today, or the second matchup that I'm predicting, the Toronto Ultra versus the Dallas Empire. And I think even though Toronto came out and they did get Ultra reverse swept after being up 4-0 in that Stage 5 Major final against the Minnesota Rocker, I still think that they're probably the most consistent team in the CDL, and they're definitely the second most dangerous, right? Cammy and Insight are 2 of the top, I don't know, what would you say, 4? Maybe at least 5 ARs in the game. Those 2 are absolutely undeniable in what they're able to do, especially in Search and Destroy and in Control Master. You have those longer lines of sight as people are trying to push lanes. When it comes to CleanX and Bans, CleanX always pushes the pace. He's a really tough kill on the map. For me, Toronto's success has always come down to how does Bance supplement the other 3. When Bance is playing unbelievably well, they win a major like they did in Stage 2 against Atlanta. When he's just average, they still make runs. They just don't quite get all the way. So in this one, I think Toronto wins here, despite the fact that I think Dallas is much improved. I think Dallas is playing really well. I think that they are a team that has to be dealt with, and one that you probably don't want to play right now, because that's what Dallas does, right? They just fix their mistakes. They are extremely consistent when it comes to playing in a major. They put in the time, they put in the work, they are extremely well prepared. They're a squad that you don't necessarily want to be playing, but that's the way it goes sometimes. So I have Toronto winning that one to give us a winner's final matchup of Atlanta versus Toronto. which goes ahead, and we have two other matchups, the round 2 elimination bracket matchups to predict. So with that, we can go ahead, and since NYSL lost, or at least I have them losing to Atlanta, that means they would match up against the Minnesota Rocker, and Dallas losing Toronto would set up a matchup between Dallas and Optic. What a matchup those two would be. So as we go ahead and look at this first matchup here of elimination bracket round 2, we have Dallas Empire versus Optic Chicago. You have to absolutely 1,000% give both of those SND maps to Dallas, right? Optic just hasn't been able as of late, whether it be the Stage 5 Major or their first matchup against NYSL and the second matchup, that second map against Florida. They have not been able to put it together in S&D. They are not making the plays. They just aren't playing smart in certain situations, and it's costing them rounds and eventually costing them maps. So both of those S&D, if it goes to a map 5, you have to say are going to go to the Dallas Empire, which means the only path to victory for Optic, at least that I can see in this matchup, is to win maps 1, 3, and 4. And I just don't know if that's going to happen right now at this point in time. So I'm going to go ahead, and I think Dallas wins this matchup to move on. I think if at least one of the 3 S&D maps that Optic played went their way, or at least they were, I don't know, I mean, at least if they put up a fight in any of those S&D maps, I would probably pick Optic here. But if they don't fix what's going on in S&D, they are not going to beat Dallas here, and ultimately they are not going to make a losers bracket run throughout champs in 2021. So I have Dallas moving on, Optic being out, which moves on to New York versus Minnesota. And this is an interesting one. So when it comes to Minnesota, they are not playing with as much fire as you saw earlier on in that Stage 5 Major. They just have struggled in certain game modes. They're not getting the same production from their ARs and their flex. So Priesta and Major Maniac are not playing, at least right now, up to the level that they did in the Stage 5 Major. I do think that can change. I think the win over LA Thieves probably gives them a bit more confidence, but if you're NYSL, you got that opening day victory over Optic, which was super impressive. It was really their first match with Clay back in the lineup. So that goes to say a bunch. They're going to have another matchup against Atlanta under their belts, which we'll see what happens. I don't think that they'll win that like we said earlier, but this will now be their second match on the day. They will already be warmed up. They had already played Atlanta, and Clay will have another series under his belt, getting back into the swing of things. So for this matchup, I think NYSL gets the victory over Minnesota. I think that this could really go either way. If you were to tell me that Minnesota ends up getting a victory in this matchup, I would not be shocked, but overall, I just feel like right now Minnesota, and by all accounts, Minnesota scrims also heading into champs really weren't going all that well. So there's a lot going against them. So I've got Dallas beating Optic in the losers bracket round 2. I've got New York beating Minnesota to set up the potential Dallas versus New York matchup. What a matchup that would be. So with that, guys, let me know in the comments, what do you agree with? What do you disagree with? Do you see a couple of these matches going the other way? Do you see Atlanta losing to NYSL? Do you see maybe Dallas clutching up against Toronto? Who knows? Does Optic make a run through losers bracket? Down in the comments, let me know. I look forward to the interactions and hearing what you guys have to say. If you're new around here, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Leave a like as it helps out the channel. And with that, enjoy day 2 of the CDL. We'll see you in tomorrow's breakdown video.